I want to bring in Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut and the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman Himes, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So let me pick up right there where my conversation left off with Hala Garani. She said that there is not much optimism that the death of Yahya Sinwar will ultimately lead to a ceasefire and a release of the hostages. What is your perspective on the significance of the death and whether a ceasefire is possible?
Well, it's obviously significant. It's significant from the standpoint of justice being delivered to a truly awful, monstrous terrorist, who really did lead the horrendous events of a year ago against Israel, in which 1,200 people were murdered. So it's significant from the standpoint of justice being delivered, and it's also significant from the standpoint of illustrating what we've seen over and over again, which is Israeli military and technological capability. Whether it was the pagers exploding in Lebanon, or the attack that killed Nasrallah, now the attack on Sinwar. What makes me very cautious about this, and I don't really want to use the word pessimistic, because so much is at stake. But what makes me really cautious is that Hamas is populated by people like Sinwar. These are dead enders. These are nihilists, right, who in some cases would rather just create chaos and anger and rage and go down as martyrs in a sea of blood than they would sit across from the Israelis or the Americans or anybody else at a negotiating table. So, one of the key ingredients here is going to be what the Palestinian people themselves, who certainly in Gaza have not had an opportunity to express their will, but if the Palestinian people of Gaza say this is a dead end and we will no longer be led by dead enders, maybe, just maybe, there's a crack in the door for a solution here.
And based on what we heard from Prime Minister Netanyahu, that this war is not over, do you think that if that were to happen, if that crack were to open up, do you think he would be willing to try to get a ceasefire at this juncture? Does he see this as the same type of turning point?
I would hope that he does. He has done some important things, controversially, of course, because of the loss of life in Gaza and the loss of innocent life in Lebanon. But he has done some important things, which is to demonstrate to his enemies that there really is no place that they can hide. At a moment in time, remember, on October 8th, people said, what just happened in Israel? We thought they were the best of the best, and yet they lost 1,200 people. So he has demonstrated that. What I think he needs to do now, because, the leadership, decimated as it may be, of Hamas, when they say we're not done, that is true. I think what the Prime Minister needs to do now, and this is really essential to winning the hearts and minds of Palestinians, is to outline a vision for the future of the Palestinian people that he would be willing to risk political capital for to achieve. Hamas is, they're more than just a military. They have a dark, evil vision, but as long as that's the only vision available to young men in Gaza, they will get recruits. So I would hope that the Prime Minister would seize this moment to say, here's what the future could be if we all stretch and if we all expend some political capital right now.
How concerned are you about a leadership vacuum, Congressman?
Well, a leadership vacuum, I assume you're talking about Hamas.
Yes, with Hamas, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a scenario that is not much discussed. But, if you have two or three heirs apparent to Sinwar, there's always the possibility for infighting. Now, that might be good from the standpoint of weakening Hamas. But of course, it would, as so much of this has been, it would be in all likelihood brutal for the Palestinian civilian population of Hamas. So we're going to need to watch this. And of course, the moment somebody is identified as the next leader, they now have the most dangerous job on the planet, because as the Israelis have demonstrated, they will find these people and they will end them. So again, I don't put a lot of stock in Hamas's ability to say this is the moment where all of a sudden we become negotiators and moderate and are willing to sort of compromise. But I would hope that the Palestinian people would say this is an opportunity, that the Prime Minister of Israel would say this is an opportunity, and stretch towards each other in the service of ending this war.
Are you anticipating that Iran will respond?
Well, that's an interesting question, right? If we think about what has happened to Iran in this last year, they had the head of Hamas assassinated in a heavily guarded Iranian compound. They stood by as Nasrallah was killed, as these various Israeli operations have happened. They stood by as two, not one, but two missile attacks on Israel were largely neutered. So I would think the Iranian regime right now would say, you know what this game is doing? This game is showing how weak we are to the world. And so maybe there's a different path. Now, again, ascribing moderate sentiments to the Iranian regime is probably a losing bet. But man, they can't look at this and say that our standing in the eyes of our people or in the eyes of the world has risen in the last year.
Congressman, if I could, I want to turn to the presidential election. I want to ask you broadly, in terms of where we are right now, you look at the polls, this is a very close, very competitive race in all of the battleground states. Vice President Kamala Harris told Fox News this week that her presidency would not be a continuation of President Biden's presidency. Excuse me. And she just spoke with my colleague, Peter Alexander, and told him, look, she is not going to criticize President Biden, that she's loyal, and that's not how she sees the relationship between a president and vice president. What do you make of this messaging, and do you think it is enough and that it will give voters the clarity they need as they make their decision?
Yeah. Call me crazy, but I guess I would hope that undecided voters today wouldn't be mulling over the precise degree of loyalty that a vice president should be showing to the president. And while acting as vice president, how much space you could between that's an unbelievably esoteric question compared to, do we really want to elect somebody who is determined to identify the enemy within, by which he means his political opponents, as the real enemy, and to use the military and the Department of Justice against that so-called enemy within? And I could go on the statements that Donald Trump has made over and over and over again. I could go on the fact that Donald Trump has no real ideology, right? He, devastated the reproductive freedoms of America's woman. And now that he's realized that it makes him a little bit unpopular, he's running in exactly the other direction. So, boy, I would really hope that undecided people in this country would not use the degree of loyalty of a vice president to a president as the factor in making their decision, when the contrast between decency and indecency and forward-looking and backward-looking and egotism and a commitment to the country, the facts there are just so clear.
All right. Congressman Jim Himes, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.